So it's recording. So welcome everyone. It's an HR webinar this time, and it's in partnership with Sia Partners and Talentsoft. We have entered an entire new era, and in fact it's a crisis. And this crisis forced us to change a lot of things in our way of working, in our way of communicating, and our way to engage our colleagues, our team, our employees. It was forced upon us and it went very, very fast. But with Jorn Fokkens and Nelly Verlinde, we were discussing the next webinar, which we wanted to do in fact physically, but it's changed into a webinar now. There's also chances in the change. And we thought, why not give it a positive look as well? Of course, we're in a crisis and we're all suffering, but there's also good things coming from it. And also HR related, there will be good things. And that's why we started this webinar with an overall title, Chances in the Change. First of all, I would like to thank Jorn Fokkens and Nelly Verlinde for helping me organizing this webinar and for sharing your expertise and your knowledge with us. Jorn Fokkens is a Senior HR and Change Manager at Sia Partners. And Sia Partners is a management consulting firm. They were founded in France 20 years ago, and they were founded in the Netherlands 10 years ago. They've been here for a while, and they're really pioneers in consulting, so very innovative. And I think this is the perfect way of showing it again, how we are immediately answering the change of all the, no, not only HR related, but Jorn is HR related issues that we have. And Nelly Verlinde is a digital HR specialist at Talentsoft. And Talentsoft is the European leader in cloud-based talent management and learning software. And Nelly was also the one hosting the last HR event. We spoke about the future of HR in last November. And then we thought that the future was quite far away. And the future was something that would happen maybe somewhere in a few years' time or in 10 years' time even. But we had concluded that the future has caught up with us, and that we're now already in the middle of the changes and of the future of HR, where we thought we would be in years of time. So today, Nelly will start by giving a recap of the last meeting we did in November, because most of you did not attend that meeting, so then you have still an idea of what was said then. And then Jorn will share his knowledge and his expertise with us on both virtual engagement and virtual recruitment. This is a trilogy of more webinars, at least 3, but maybe there will be even come up more topics, also depending on your inputs. So let me now give the word to Nelly. I still have to admit a couple of people, and then maybe Jorn, shall I share my screen and give you the possibility to just speak?
Yeah, I will stop sharing this one.
Right.
And then you can share yours.
Yes. And I hope you all heard me well, because this is the first time I see you. So I hope it was all okay. So can I give Nelly the words?
Yes, you can. Thank you very much, Sylvie, and good afternoon, everyone. I am very pleased to be part of this webinar series. Perhaps on a practical note, just before I start, if you do have any questions, you can ask them in the chat, and then we'll take a few moments during the webinar to answer your questions, so don't hesitate. So as Sylvie already said, last year in November, I had the pleasure of talking about HR trends during an HR committee meeting with the Chamber of Commerce. And while Jorn and Sylvie were talking about preparing this webinar series, we realized that quite a few of these trends that we believed were indeed somewhere in the near future, that they had actually become the present. So I'll give you a bit of a recap of what we talked about in November, and then I'll also make the link with how they have become very relevant right now. So the first trend I talked about in November was back to school. Yeah, so what do I mean by back to school? It means that, as you may know, we find ourselves in the so-called fourth industrial revolution. Technological developments are going very, very quickly. A lot of industries and jobs, they are going to see a lot of automation happening, and this will have an impact on many people. So we already saw that on the one hand, of course, this will mean that certain jobs will disappear, but on the other hand, technological developments will also create new jobs for which new sorts of skills are needed. Which means that a lot of people, they will actually either need to be retrained, they will need to acquire new skills and new competencies. I believe that it was research from the World Economic Forum that showed that by 2022, so that's only 2 years from now, at least half of the workforce would need to be reskilled. So there was this really big need that existed already for people to be trained. When we met last year in November. So on the one hand, there was that. And on the other hand, that created also the need for a different way of looking at learning, meaning that you may very well have all the skills you need right now to do your job very well, but it's very likely that in 2-3 years from now, you will actually need to have different skills because your job will change as well. So we need to have this new mindset of wanting to learn new things. Now, that was last year in November. If we then go back to the present, to now, we find ourselves in a situation where many people are now working from home. And companies are thinking about, okay, how can we now help these people spend that time in a useful way? Because while some of us may actually have the chance to be able to continue their work from home, a lot of people, they find themselves at home and they can't really continue to work. If you think, for example, of people working in the retail industry. So companies are now thinking of, okay, how can we actually make this time useful for our people, and how can we as an organization benefit from that as well? So something that's logical that comes up then is, okay, now we can use this time to start training our people. There's actually, I think, a really cool example of this coming from a company here in the Netherlands that has done this, I think, incredibly well, and they have moved super fast. So I'll tell you what they did. So this is a company indeed in the retail industry, and what they do is they sell suits, and they sell suits that are custom made. Now, if you, of course, go into a store and you want a custom-made suit, then someone working in that store will have to take the measurements. They will have to make adjustments so that then the person who's going to be actually making the suit custom knows what to do. But that involves, of course, touching the customers. Now, this is not possible at the moment because we have to keep our distance. So what have they done? And I think they've done this incredibly fast, as I already said. In these past couple of weeks, they have retrained their people so that now they know how to help their customer and to basically make the suit ready to be changed and custom made afterwards without touching the customer. I think this is a fantastic example of how they not only have been thinking of, okay, how can we retrain our people, but as an organization, they've also asked themselves the question, what will the world look like after this period? And when things go back to normal, how is this going to look? And perhaps things will never go back to the normal that we knew before. So we need to adapt. And they actually did in thinking ahead. So I think that's a really cool example of how learning is super relevant still today. The second trend that I mentioned last year is recruitment. So yes, now recruitment as such, of course, is not a trend. That's also not why we spoke about it last year. We spoke about recruitment because this is something that is always relevant for organizations and was also very relevant a few months ago and is still relevant now because the market for a lot of organizations has been quite tough. It was hard to find people. So a few of the things that I mentioned back then was Generation Z, the youngest generation that is entering the workforce, and that has already been entering the workforce for the last couple of years in entry-level positions. And another aspect I mentioned was the importance of onboarding that we've seen. We've seen a lot of companies increasingly looking at onboarding, realizing that it's all good and well to invest a lot of time and energy in recruiting people, but if you then don't onboard them properly, you have a real risk of losing them very fast. So there was this increased attention for onboarding. Now, if we translate that to the present, and this is something we'll be talking about later in this webinar as well with Jorn, is as weird as this may seem, certain companies, they are still hiring right now, and maybe they even have quite a big need to hire people right now. So this leaves them with all these questions of, okay, how am I actually going to recruit fully digitally, because I can't physically meet people right now? How do I keep in touch with my candidates? How do I also make sure that the process is quick enough, because it's digital only at the moment? And then if we look one step further, how am I going to onboard someone remotely? So this is something that has become very relevant all of a sudden as well. Then the third trend that we spoke about last year was what I called the era of the employee. This is something that we've seen for the past couple of years already, that companies have increasingly been making a real effort to improve the so-called employee experience. Employee experience is, of course, a bit of is maybe a big word. So really, what does it mean? It means that there's attention for three different elements. So the first element is the tech. So the software, the hardware, basically all the material that people need to do their work properly. Then there is the space, which until recently was, of course, the work environment. So this can either be an office or any other kind of a shared working space. There was then the space, and then there was the culture, which was the company culture. So these three elements together create what we call the employee experience. And companies have been making really big efforts to improve this employee experience over the past years, because as I mentioned just before, often it's hard to recruit new people. So companies, they actually are trying to keep the people that they have and to see how they can keep them happy, but also how can they help them develop themselves and grow and perhaps move internally to different positions so that they stay within the company. Something else that I mentioned when it comes to the, I'm still with the, yeah, thank you. Something else that I mentioned when I spoke about employee experience was the blended workforce. And the blended workforce is the fact that many organizations now, they don't work only with people that have a full-time contract anymore. They tap into the freelance markets. They sometimes have people working part-time. They have contractors. So you get this real mix of people with different types of contracts, but they all work for the same organization. And a really big question is, how do you still get these people to work together as one team? And how do you get them to feel committed to your company? Again, if we translate this to the present, to the now, we see that attention for employees has become even more important, because we are physically further apart from each other, with many people confined to their homes. But at the same time, we really need to keep this connection with people. And I think this is one of the beautiful things that we see. And I don't want to say that it's all beautiful what is happening in these times, but I think one of the beautiful things that we see right now is that in a way, people are interacting with each other in a more personal way. If we look at this webinar already, all three of well, everyone here is actually in their home environment. So you can basically look into someone's home. So this has allowed me, for example, over the past few weeks to learn things about my colleagues that I didn't know before, just because I saw a simple painting in the back, and then, you start a discussion. And another thing that I've noticed is that when people now ask me, how are you? They actually listen, because we're all in the same situation. We all have the same, more or less the same kind of difficulties. So when someone asks me, how are you? People are also more honest. And if they're not doing okay, they're going to be saying, well, actually, I'm kind of fed up with the situation, and I can't stand staying in my home anymore. So we see that there's this perhaps a little bit more sincere attention and also a lot more comprehension for the situation of individual employees, also from a manager perspective. And then the last trend that I wanted to mention is workers going multi. This is something that we've seen for a while already as well. What it means is that work is sometimes becoming multi-project. People are not necessarily working on one project anymore or on one type of project. They can also actually be working on projects that are not necessarily part of their job description. So it's becoming multi-project, but it's also sometimes becoming multi-employer. Think of the freelancers or people that are having several part-time jobs, but it's also becoming multi-space. At least last year when we had this HR committee, it was multi-space because then we could still work from a coffee shop or we could work from home and we could work in the office. At the moment, of course, it's mostly working from home, but work is going multi. This is something that was already happening last year. If we translate it then into the present, what we see happening now, and what I think is also quite interesting, is that since some people find themselves working from home in a rather challenging situation, especially if they have kids that are a young age, or sometimes they have their husbands or wives also working from the same space. So this can be really challenging. And what you see happening, at least what I've seen happening already, is that then other people step up and they say, okay, you know, if you can't handle this right now because you just don't have the time or you know, you don't physically have the opportunity to work on certain projects, let me take over or let me do that for you. So here you see actually in a natural way, you see that people are starting to work on different projects that are definitely not necessarily their job in the first place. And so actually they start developing themselves already into different projects. Now that was actually from my end the short recap of the trends that we identified last year as being the future, and actually those are very relevant right now. And I think this is also the part where we are going to go to Jorn.
And Nelly, thanks for that. Just there's one question in the chat about onboarding functionality in Talentsoft tooling. I don't know whether it's a very quick answer. Otherwise, I will ask Casper to come back to you separately.
So the question is whether there is an onboarding functionality in the Talentsoft tool?
And probably what it looks like.
So to give you a short answer, there is indeed an option to create, to do onboarding within the Talentsoft tool. That option exists. What it looks like, you can basically customize it as you wish. So it can literally look very differently from one company to another. I think I need to leave it with that for now, but if you want to know more about that, you can always ask me afterwards.
Right.
Thank you very much, Nelly. And of course, Nelly will stay in the webinar. So if you have other questions for her later on, then please do not hesitate. So now Jorn is taking over. That means that Nelly will see whether there's questions. If there are any questions, don't hesitate to ask them in the chat, and then we will take our time in between to answer those. So can I give you the mic, Jorn?
Yes, I hope everybody can hear me all right.
I'm trying with my... Yes.
All right. And so again, I hope everybody hears me. Then I'll start off. It's a very provocative statement in this first slide. But the other day when we started preparing, I thought, oh my God, actually, we are seeing so many different sort of crises. We've seen the big fires in Australia. We're seeing refugees all over the place. We're seeing big swans in Africa, the floods in India, big famine in Yemen, etc. And there's, of course, the big exodus and migrants. And then on top of that, we've seen this pandemic, a worldwide crisis affecting each and every one of us. And lots of us and futurists are really saying this is a crisis, but it's probably an impact that will see for many years to come, and maybe it probably changes a lot. So despite the fact that it is painful and that people are losing lives, etc., from a change perspective, it's also very interesting times. And we thought, well, we have to stay optimistic and look at the chances in the change. And so Sylvie and Nelly already elaborated a bit on that, and I hope to take you a little bit further in what we can do to bring that out there. So we do have a context of a global pandemic and a crisis, and there are governments taking severe measures, and a lot of countries are deploying different versions. So there's lots of jobs, there's massive bankruptcy, and lots of things to go on that we all know about and catch up in the news. So it means that companies sometimes come to a full close and can't survive, but there's offices that close but do work virtually. What does it mean? Business continuity is at stake. Another futurologen in Dutch, futurists are saying actually business as usual is dead. So what does that mean for us? Social distancing is affecting everybody. We have the 1.5 meter economy being talked about. And then when we're talking about workforce, we used to talk in HR about workplace well-being, and maybe we need to talk about virtual workplace well-being. So what does that imply? So we've got key questions. Nelly and Sylvie already talked about that, but what does it actually mean to engage our workforce and keep engaging them virtually? How else in these times of crisis? What can we offer our workplace to digitally evolve them? And how can we use digital platforms like in this Zoom that seems to be working really well and is getting a lot of attention, but there's many other platforms out there. The chances lay in front of us. How do we mobilize our workforce to identify them? So it's not only leaders or people in ivory towers anymore. Now we need to collectively think about the chances and opportunities, and sometimes companies need to actually reinvent themselves. I just wouldn't want to be in oil, gas, or aviation at this point. How can leaders stimulate creativity while connecting virtually? So a couple of questions for us to think about. So we decided to talk really about the engagement part. One other slide here that I liked and picked up. VUCA is a term that most HR managers are familiar with: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Now, more than ever, we are facing these kind of challenges. But as we are pioneers in thinking positively and the glass rather half full than half empty, we could take the same acronyms and translate them to the velocity, unorthodoxy, or perhaps uncertainty, how to live with uncertainty. The C for creativity, more needed than ever, especially we want to reinvent ourselves and come up with clever solutions to painful questions. And ambiguity could become awareness. So we think there is really an awareness, global awareness, almost a gaining global consciousness as a human species. So very interesting for us to follow on that trend. So VUCA is here, and we may also take the positive side of VUCA in that one. On the next slide, just still want to say something about this historic transformation. We've seen almost biblical times, it's a bit provocative, but Milton Friedman said it also right. Only in a crisis, whether that's actual or perceived crisis, that produces real change. So real change is coming from crisis, because often there is just no more options. And you need to find a change to get your way out of that. But that crisis, when it occurs, the actions that we're taking depend on the ideas that are laying around. I think that's a nice statement, because it actually says that we're all responsible for how we answer to this crisis. We're all responsible to bring creativity, new ideas, well, to whatever, to the work floor, to each other, to society, politics, anything. So that's a nice statement of Mr. Friedman. again, the global pandemic is a deep crisis, but it also gives insights in human values. Now there's loneliness out there, there's distance, and there's an extra feeling of coming back together again. So it almost comes to a test to humanity, if you will. I said it in the previous slide, the consciousness that we're gaining is vast. We're gaining this global consciousness and need to find our identity again, and who are we as a human species. So we need to now move from just intelligence, so is a smart thing to do, to almost becoming conscious, to fully aware of everything we do and not do, or how we respond to Mother Earth, nature, etc., what it means for us humans, and how to deal with that. So I think we're seeing a big gain in global consciousness. Very interesting, because it evolves the planet. And we're all very busy in our jobs. So we are feeling busyness, but actually business is a translation of being very busy. Now you come to a point to say, is that really worth it, being very busy all the time? It looks like that's very become important, but we need to maybe think about our reason of existence. Why are we here? What are we contributing to? So our raison d'être, as we are in a French company here with CCI, and that's the most beautiful word for reason of existence. But not adapting means you may not exist tomorrow. So there's just almost no more going back, or going back to business as usual. And I think, and I believe very much within the HR and change community, that the non-routine work is going to be the future. So routine work, AI is already taking that over. And I think now the non-routine work, so almost the right brain hemisphere, is all about creativity, empathy, ethics, innovation. That's what we need. This is the return of the human-only work, where AI takes over what is not really human. But at least the statement here is remote everything is here and now, and probably won't go back to normal. So anything that was in groups, gatherings, meetings, and whether it's in cultural, in concerts, whether it's in companies, we need to get used to the remote everything. And that's an interesting way to look at the world where we are now, and probably here to stay. So then let me take you to the next slide. This is just a graph. We don't need to read it all, but remote work in the Netherlands has been already a bit of a trend. And actually, as the crisis of Corona broke out, we saw also an increase in remote work. So the Netherlands is fairly comfortable in remote work, and maybe even pioneering. And so we hope to also set the right example as a country. But it's really not enough. We still need to improve and increase more and more, because of the statement I just did in the previous slide. So there's a couple of trends out there. There's a 44% growth in remote work over the last 5 years. But compared to 10 years ago, it's 91%. So we are increasing, and now there's almost no choice, as you can all understand. I don't know if it's worth reading further. This is, I think I'll leave it at that point. We're doing well, but we need to improve remote work. Yeah, that's fine. Let's go to the next one. Now, what does it mean to work remote? I think the word home office is a word we will see more and more. I'm even preaching home office innovation at this point. But there's something you can do as an individual. So you have your own responsibility as well, apart from the engagement that I think we still need to tackle in the next slides. But in this slide, there's just a couple of statements in how you can do that as a employee, as a contractor, as somebody working in an office very remote. Start early, just pretend that you are going to the office, but it will be your home office. Build in that routine, how to structure your day, how to choose a dedicated workspace so that you're not really disturbed. I know we're having children walking around and pets and people ringing your doorbells, and there's lots of distraction. You need to sort of coordinate that a bit and find a quiet place, especially when we're doing these webinars, etc. Work when you're most productive. Now that's an interesting one because you can now choose your own timing much better. So if you skip breakfast because that's your most productive time, then there's nobody that will keep you from doing that. So there's a bit of a self-discipline here that comes to play, a self-organization. I'm going to skip the remarks on the right bottom side. You probably get the slides later on. It is a bit self-explanatory, but it is about self-discipline, self-organization that we found in this research. Taking this a step further, I'm really keen to talk about this engagement. This is one of the main topics that we're so interested in how to do that. A lot of employers are asking them the questions, how do we keep our workforce still engaged? Because we don't see them, we do not have that physical presence. There's of course companies that are more experienced with this than others. Still, there's just no more choice. Now, first of all, why is engagement so important? Now, Nelly has really talked about that really well, that it is the future. This is the era of employees or workers. This is the era where we need creativity, future jobs. And people are just best motivated when we take care of their well-being and when they are engaged. So being engaged prevents employees from experiencing stress or burnout or bore out. You even have bore out. People just bored sick and report to healthcare. And there's a direct impact on your organizational performance if people are engaged, if they're feeling well. So this is scientifically proved. Engaged employees are more resilient and healthier overall. But now we need to engage them virtually. This is the whole thing. So when do they feel engaged is when they perceive the right amount of job resources and of information. And so that cannot no longer be checked face to face. You need to really see how we organize that. So this is a virtual sort of contract and contact to see how we can provide employees with the right amount of work, resources, assignments, clarity, alignment, and this whole human element of relationship also comes to play much more than probably it was physically. Equally, it needs to perceive the right performance, or employees in general need to have the right support from managers or leaders. So they need to have they need to feel autonomously, they need to feel appreciated, they need to feel challenged in the work. And that's a dedicated balance, because we're all human beings and it's not one size fits all. And as well, we need to have the right physical space to work. And that now has become your home office. So there is this job stresses, and we've got virtual resources, and how to sort of bring virtual resources to a level that we can decrease the job stresses. It also means understanding where the job stresses come from. So in general, work engagement is a very positive, fulfilling thing, and we need to characterize that with vigor, dedication, and absorption, and need to think about that and increase and improve this virtual well-being every other day, as it may be one thing here to stay. Let's dive a little bit more into depth with the virtual engagement. Together with my dear team and colleagues, and there's some great artists out there that helped design this. So that's a big thank you. But we identified in well-being actually a couple of let's say levels. You've got your physical well-being. So are you physically well? Do you have enough sports? Do you move? Are you sitting properly? Do you have your desk at the right height? All those things to talk about. And because in the office we made it a big thing. Now you need to take care of that in the office. But there's a psychological and a mental health as well. And if you even take that a bit further, there's a spiritual well-being. Lots of stuff to think about, to talk about, but we need to keep asking the question, how are you doing? How are you really doing? Are you physically okay, but are you also mentally okay? Is there an understanding of loneliness? Are you well connected? So digital well-being also now becomes a word. Are you enough connected? Do you have the right tooling? So to disrupt any of these 5 elements, it is the lack of the face-to-face supervision. We cannot no longer actually see or witness it in the office or the work floor. There's also a lack of information or access to information if you can't physically ask for that. So also that information needs to become virtual and digital, made digital available. The lack of it may cause stress. Also mutual knowledge. So what do you know? What do I know? If we collaborate, or what don't I know that you know that that may give you the feeling of being left out. And also a mutual understanding between your colleagues, your peers, or you, your manager, or the other way around, is vital to have those well-being elements in place. There's a couple of other social isolation, loneliness, of course, we need to really take care of that. There is a sense of belonging. If you lose the sense of belonging, that also hits the well-being elements. And of course, the distractions from home, as I said in the previous slides. And of course, work-life balance, that's an interesting one, because that almost now is sort of intertwined more than ever to the risk point that people, wake up, get their cup of coffee and start working straight away, and maybe even when it's very busy with calls, try to eat something during a call and then perhaps work late, go to bed, and the next day it starts again. So that is the risk, that people just don't take any more leisure or time off or good distractions from work. So we need to watch out that is coming a thing. The other thing is that if you're not connected, or if you are not in touch, maybe people just do not have any work at all. So that's the other way. How to balance that? How to balance properly work with good leisure, etc., etc., as a disruptor from your well-being. Now let's go to the next slide. We have found a couple of let's say, steps to take that we believe will increase virtual employee engagement. But before I go in there, are there any questions at this point or in the chat that I need to answer? Because otherwise I'm keep talking. Nelly, any questions at this point or from the audience?
No questions in the chat yet. No.
All right, good. So any questions, we can move maybe towards the end. So let me read that out. This crisis gives us a chance to evaluate the structure of work and how organizational processes have to adapt. Yeah, it's also a chance. We were very busy. It is all about efficiency. It's all about effectiveness. But well-being became more and more popular, and I think it is now, as Nelly said, the future of work is very important. The era of the employee. This is also a chance to bring more value to that one. So as we navigate this unknown territory, we have unique opportunity to examine the ways we are working and to be more inclusive with our employees, to have a more diverse employee setting, diversity is becoming more hot, I think, especially those who may be dealing with significantly more challenges. So if people are, just imagine a person having a very small house, 2 babies around, pets, and they all need to work in school. I have 2 children that I have to also give attention with some discipline. They're all distractions. So that sometimes needs to be known with your managers and your colleagues, because you need to just simply manage that. And sometimes you need more help and others may need a bit less. But to talk about that and to understand that is going to be important. So basics, logistics in place, digital at all. Every other employee needs to have access to technology. So that's so we almost forget that. But you know, imagine you don't have Wi-Fi in your home. You just can't imagine that. But it could be. So how would an employer deal with that? Make virtual meetings equitable. Acknowledge everybody in the room. So if you are in the meetings, please understand and acknowledge that everybody's there and not just somebody that sits out there in the back and just be listening in only. But make sure that virtually you create the community and use, you know, chat programs, maybe multiple chats, as long as you get that contact and that connection going. So basics in place, logistics, it needs to be there. If we go to a next step in this one, communicate. Communication is key. It's about the frequency of communication. It's about how to actually schedule these calls and plan them and do that with video. So you can indeed, as Nelly said, look in one's homes, which is becoming more personal, but you are in touch and that's becoming more important. You have to be felt that you are seen and acknowledged and that you're part of that community and don't get the feeling that you're left out. So organize these daily check-ins, maybe as a group or as a team, even if it's 5-10 minutes. It's the virtual stand-up that's been born and there's lots of apps for that. Also gain feedback. So how are we doing? How are we doing in the relationship? How are we doing at work, but how are you doing privately? How are we doing in this relationship? Make sure there's many communication options available. Equally interesting is to establish rules of engagement. So how are we going to engage from now on? And are we using this tool or that one? Is everybody going to be on mute when you're not talking? Are we all going to be present? Is everybody need to be present, or can you go out for a coffee, etc.? Any rules of engagement. So you have created a new engagement, rules or principles, so that there's no misunderstanding. It takes 5, 10, 20 minutes, but then if you have it, it's clear, and ask if everybody's comfortable with that. Take advantage of communal workspaces, and there's lots of them. There's one slide that we will show you a lot of an overview of all the platforms that we identified until now, and of course provide opportunities for remote social interactions as well. Participation, a next step. So when you've done your logistics and you set up your communications, then participation is the word. So build trusting relationship. Trust is going to be key in working. When somebody is not comfortable, whether professionally or personally, consult, ask questions. So as a leader or manager, you're also becoming a bit of the consultant, the mentor, the mentee, or a coach. Because the more a person from a distance virtually is happy or comfortable or balanced, the better you can work together and the better the performance will be. Make onboarding activities memorable. Onboarding could be a new hire, but it could also be onboarding on a new assignment. Make them memorable. There's a lot of creativity through the net you can make them do some assignments, or tell some jokes, or share some interesting insights. Let everybody introduce themselves in a very virtually interesting way. Make it memorable, so you're feeling part of the community. Offer encouragement, emotional support. Give remote employees real responsibilities. This is where responsibility is rising, really interesting. And set up extra curricular activities. So if anybody likes to do something else that's good for the resume, or some activities to challenge them, that's good. Conscious of time, we need to move on to the next couple of steps. Otherwise, I'm going to delay. So what's the next step? Where is group tactics? Yeah, so we are collaborating often as a group, and we're doing that virtually. But here, as a manager leader, you can still make sure that we're all aligned to an organization direction or a project direction. You set the performance expectations. It's about aligning on those expectations, so making them clear. So it comes back to the communication part. Sense of the community, and hold people accountable in the end, to increase high performance as a team. And then appreciate, because here you are feeling recognized again. So there's lots of ways to do that. It's again the checking in. It is about personal appreciation. It's about understanding. It's about maybe giving some extra budget to improve your home office, or any other benefits for remote employees. And then when we've done all that, we hopefully in the last step, one more click on the slide, happy employee engagement, hopefully. Keep on improving this process. So keep sharing your best practices, send maybe fact-based surveys out there, and there's lots of tools to do that. Keep evaluating how a home office quality is going, and ask for suggestions to improve this process, to improve the process of being virtually engaged at all times. So quality becomes very important, and when the quality is right, people are balanced, then the performance can still continue, or maybe even increase. So those are a couple of steps. And from the beginning, I think there's basics and there's some advanced and improved engagement techniques, but the repetition on this, I think, and the next slide, I've done a circle where we ask you to be aware about this all, be aware about your personal circumstances and the home office environment, assess it frequently, frequently ask how we're doing, how people are motivated, if they're still motivated, and what to do if not. Make sure that you, from the relationship you co-create, that could be a manager, a team member, but it could be between colleagues, and perhaps somebody doesn't dare to speak up, but then hopefully as a team you speak up for somebody else virtually as well. So it's both professionally, it's as privately, it's also coaching, it's mentorship, frequent touch points, align, implement touch points, and keep on repeating them. Don't assume that it's all okay in last week's call. So to repeat that and being in touch is very important, and to be very invitive if somebody is not feeling okay or has a problem, that you invite employees to reach you, to contact you, to reach out. Well, deploy this thing. So respect the engagement frequency. Just when you have done your rules of engagement and your process, then stick to it, commit to it, because otherwise you would lose the trust again from your employees. And keep evolving continuously. Yeah, next slide is fine. This is an overview. We're not going into that, but when you get this overview, just understand how many digital tools there are out there that you could use. We're now using Zoom as a webinar, which is in the fourth column. But look at what there is available. Some are paid services, some are for free. But start exploring them. Technology is out there. We should not become technology and forget the human side, but let technology enable us to become more human in our interactions and to be more engaged. That's what how we should use technology. So this could be interesting. And just last night, I facilitated a brainstorm session with Miro, which is the right bottom, Miro next to Mural. And actually, it helps us virtually, each in its own home office, to brainstorm on some ideas. And you need to take to get the hang of it a little bit, but it's possible. We have got creativity content as well in Sia Office to help people out there to bring those tools to life and increase collaboration. So that's interesting. So this is just an overview for your idea. Now,
yeah, perhaps if I can just interrupt
sure.
or maybe add something about that, because I think that could be interesting to know, is that there are many of these solutions and tools out there, and I'm not just speaking about Talentsoft here, but there are many of them that have actually now launched free trials specifically for this period and perhaps beyond as well, because they know that a lot of companies have found themselves in this work from home situation and they did not necessarily have the right tools. So if you are going to look into to those, you will see that a lot of them have now these these special periods, so to speak, to try them out.
Perfect. Thanks, Nay. One topic that also was raised is how are we doing now in these times of crisis and lockdowns, quarantine, and what have you? How do we deal with recruitment and onboarding? Now, people, a lot of companies are not hiring, but there are companies that are hiring. There is even companies out there that take advantage of this time because there's more talent available because of the freeze in other companies. Still, how do you do this? Before I dive into this, we have got an interesting guest also in this webinar. In Sia Partners, we actually hired Marleen Wilms very recently, and really when we signed the contract, the Corona crisis broke out, and we need to see how we can extend a little bit maybe the period before she actually onboards, and we are actually finding the best timing to onboard. Still, it's very interesting for us to learn how we can stay in touch, how we can improve the engagement at the levels that people are maybe not even yet joined, but are still already beginning to be part of the family. She's present, and she will unmute her microphone in a minute, and we can ask her some questions as well. But the basic idea that we have brought you in this almost last slide is that in your selection, video interview, so selection, there's lots of video interviews already happening. You know, get to know a person, make sure there is a culture fit. You're all doing that already. But it has to go through video interviews, and then you are into someone's home, and that's fine because you want to hire not only skills or knowledge, you want to hire a person with its own mindset, beliefs, and principles. So online, you can more and more check on relevant skills. There is questions probably more and more to talk about how resourceful a person can be, because we need to ask from a person to be more self-motivating and self-organized and self-disciplined. So the accent in the skills could change from just pure knowledge and technology savvy and having some skills to be more self-motivating. So it helps us in asking the right questions when you are also inclined to hire somebody virtually and well, and that stays in home office to work. And then communicate frequently. As it is a person already employed, your communication is still key. Frequency, open, honest, etc., etc. And then for the onboarding, and this is the last thing I'll say, and then I ask Marleen to say a couple of words, is about sending the right package with personal welcome, onboarding with instructions, things to train, things to learn, agree perhaps on a couple of goals in 1 or 2 months, and then engage. Encourage hiring managers to have frequent touch points. You can monitor this from your HR chair. And of course, avoid overdose. So if don't throw everything at the person and just say, well, there's enough to do there. Keep on having that contact and that check-in. Now, I realize we've got a couple of last minutes. So Marleen, have you unmuted yourself?
Yes, I hope everybody...
All right, we can hear you. Now, Marleen, yes. It's interesting for this community to perhaps ask you a couple of questions, but what would you say in this process, what you would value from a distance and not really fully being on board yet, but still hired? What's your feeling? What do you say to this?
Well, what I appreciate the most in my process, as I could call it, is that we kind of have the appointment just to keep in contact. We call weekly or once in the 2 weeks, and we just get each other keep updated, and we're just waiting or finding the right moments to start and to get onboarded. And that's what I actually appreciate, because if I would start now and will get onboarded and it's hard to find work to do, then I think that's also not so good for my motivation. So I really appreciate it that we find together the right moment and still have the commitment to start.
Thank you. So appreciation of the open dialogue, the
yes.
openness about what the actual situation is, to keep you updated on where we are, finding the possibilities, and even to the point that you're now actually joining this webinar and hopefully in feeling fully engaged and already in thinking mode and how to even improve where we are. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm getting. So it's interesting. I just want to open up a little bit to the audience to ask also questions to you when people may want to use that opportunity. Nelly, are there any questions in the chat or people in the audience that want to ask me or Marleen questions at this point?
At this point, no, we don't have any questions yet.
No questions? Anybody in the audience that would like to unmute and ask questions, because we're almost at the top of the hour and there's still 1 or 2 minutes to ask questions. Anything you would like to ask, please do. Not really, silent. So, well, in that, if there's really no questions, then
I think I don't necessarily have a question, but I do think I have something to add on the onboarding part, because I think something to really keep in mind here is that there are going to be companies that are going to be fully digitally onboarding people during this period because they don't have a choice. And then once we are going to be able to go back into the office or back into the workplace, and we're probably all going to be in a rush. I hope this won't be the case, but we're going to be in a rush to get back to business as usual. That I think something that could happen is that companies forget that they have new hires that have only digitally been onboarded and that have actually never set foot physically in the office. So I think it's really important to not forget this, because otherwise all the work that you've done with your onboarding in engaging people and making them feel part of the team, I think all that work will get lost a little bit because we forget that people have never set foot in the office. They don't know where to go. They don't know, for example, where simple things like the canteen or the coffee machine are. They have never met perhaps their team members in real life. So I think this is a really important one, because I can see it happening that once things go more or less back to normal, or at least we go back to the work environment, that companies forget about this. So
yeah, I completely agree with you. And this is going back to being busyness. And we now need to understand that we're all humans. We need to make sure that we care. And in this time and age, we care for our elderly, for our health caretakers. So the word care becomes more and more on the agenda. It is a typical HR word. And I think the human needs really incline to that. So even if you're new and you have been onboarded, do ask around, and also if people are comfortable and can find everything, but equally dare to ask, like, hey, I'm just first time here, show me. So I'm realizing we're just about a couple of minutes over, and I just want to give back the word to Sylvie, whether we need to stop or have a couple more minutes for any questions, or because there's so much to talk about, but this hour is just so quick.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much, Jorn, and thank you very much, Nelly, of course. I think it depends on the agenda of the audience if they have some time left. For me, it's fine if you want to ask some questions still. Maybe let me stop sharing the screen so we can look in each other's eyes, more or less.
Okay.
Let me see, there is a chat, which I can see now. Oh no, that's someone who had to leave. Well, if there's any more questions, or maybe you want to share your experience, I can imagine there's a lot going on, and you are coming from different sectors. I can see from the ones who have joined. So maybe you want to either ask a question or share an experience.
That's one question.
Just unmute yourself.
Yeah, and one other question that I have to the audience: we are planning to have 2 more webinars at least. Are there any topics, issues, or problems that you would like to see addressed so we can prepare in answering those? Then please review them now, or even later on. Please reach out to us so we can try and come back to those points in the next webinars.
Yeah.
So just to share a little story, we have our office in Paris, and we are actually quite lucky in France, in Paris, because of the French strikes. Everyone was used to home office.
Yeah, that's very good indeed.
Yeah, that's true.
I have a question also. What interests me, because you said, hey, then we go back to work, back to business. But that is what we discussed with our within our firm. I mean, back to what? I mean, what will our business be changed for good? Because that's something that interests me. We now learning these new means of communication and new way of work. So yes, will it be the same when we come back?
Who wants to answer, Jorn?
Well, my personal opinion is, first of all, I don't think everything will be the same anymore, because we've got our attention is really so at so many different places. Our realization on what we've gone through as a human species, and also in the glass half full, to understand that, oh my God, all of a sudden we can take care of Mother Earth because we're just no more, we can almost reach the Paris Accords. But I think for a couple of industries, they need to reinvent themselves full time. Oil and gas industry, aviation, or others, they just have a big problem. There are sectors that could come back maybe to as good as possible business as usual, but I think we're almost to the point that we need to ask from ourselves, what value do we bring tomorrow? In other words, what we've done so far, is it good enough for the post-corona era? I rather have us think about it now rather than come up with the need to do that when you try to come back to business as usual. A phrase that I love very dearly in change is the sentence, change before you have to. In other words, think about it rather now, about if you're going to be resilient and future-proof and all that stuff, and whether that's in line with our global consciousness, and initiate and be a pioneer in it, rather than wait until what your environment tells you to be the next norm, but help construct the new normal.
Are there any other questions?
No, just wanted to add something. on our experience doing home offices is that the thanks and compliments and congratulations to the team. Actually, to a team member, you should copy the others of the team, because it's really very much appreciated by the people, and I had a great return on that.
Yeah,
showing appreciation. It is the simplest thing to do, and it means a lot. And this is where we come back to the relationship and to value another person's input or output or result, a collaboration. It is very simple to do, and it's really well appreciated in the receiver of the compliment. So excellent. I think I would encourage everybody to keep doing that. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Another question. Just thank you all for this initiative. So good learning. Just the struggle we have a factory and we have office people. So how to engage all people at the same time, certainly at this moment. So that's one thing. And the other thing is my team is global. So it's in China and in the US and in Europe. So we have these time differences. So that's another challenge we have. So that's the two things I would like to share. But that's my problem. But there were some good learnings inside your presentation. So Jörn and Nelly, thank you for this.
Thank you, and be blessed with the diversity that you have globally, and you can learn from each other. And there is apps and everything, how to collaborate, and we're even trying to think about how to help also the factory, the blue collar workers with new technology. Everybody's got a phone, and you can learn on your phone and share best practices, make people more responsible, also in the 1.5 meter economy. So there's really more ways to keep everybody connected and being in touch. There are solutions for that. So happy to have another conversation at a later stage.
Karel, would that be a subject that you would like to explore maybe in a next webinar, where we speak more about if you have globally virtual you have teams globally and virtual currently, so we can see whether I look at Nelly and Jorn, if we can maybe go into that in next webinar. Still, is that a possibility?
We can definitely take that topic, note it down, and see what we can bring for value. And I believe what I would, the title of our next webinar, I think, is trying to unlock the wisdom of the crowd and creativity. So it maybe touches a little bit upon your point there.
Yeah. But it's good to take that into account, that you might have teams all over the world, and indeed the time difference is always a challenge then.
Yeah, but that's a challenge. It's more what you're saying, the diversity. So if to unlock that, but that's something for next week, I guess.
Okay, we are going to write it down. Thank you, Karel. Because that's what we wanted. We had indeed with the trilogy, we had already mentioned the next two titles, but still we are open for new for other topics as well, because so we had for the next webinar we said the title would be Enable the Wisdom of the Crowd, and then the third one would be the digital leadership. But please do share with us if you have any topics, if you want to speak more about still the virtual recruitment or onboarding, could also be another topic in the next webinar. So we are looking for your feedback as well, because yeah, the more we know what your needs are, the better we can prepare the next webinar.
Yeah, and the invitation to pioneer together. Huh? We're going to all be pioneers, and this is you know, we laughed yesterday when we said never waste a good crisis. Yeah. Well, indeed, let's not.
Indeed. Well, if there are no more questions, I'm going to thank Jorn Fokkens and Nelly Verlinde for sharing their knowledge, for their time, for their effort here.
I have just one practical question, Sylvie, coming from the chat. It's the question is whether the presentation will be sent by email afterwards. Is that possible?
Yes, if you are okay with sharing it, we will love to do that for sure. Okay. And we can also share the recording if everyone is fine with that. Yeah.
Yeah, we can do that. No problem. And thank you all for joining in.
And if I might just interrupt, we will also put the recording and the presentation on our website.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there you go. Many digital channels already, multi-generation channels. Really good. Thank you all for joining. It was fantastic. We hope to see more of you, and please reach out if you have any other topics, questions later on that you couldn't think of during this hour. So we're creating this community and keep exploring knowledge and our new ways of working going forward in this crisis and post-corona.
Thank you very much, and hope to see you next time.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.